I once went to a storytelling workshop with an incredible woman called Bobette Buster, who's a kind of Hollywood screenwriter, and she's this kind of 60-year-old New Yorker dressed all in black, with this kind of great accent and kind of really sassy. And you can just imagine her like haranguing the director about taking a line of dialogue out of whatever the script she was. And so we all sit down for this storytelling workshop, and she just said, "Right, I want you all to tell me a story about your life. That's it. Off you go, round in the circle." And I was like second in this circle, so I had to go second. So the first guy went, told a story, came to me, and I literally I didn't have a clue what to say. And something popped into my head about, when I was a baby, my parents had been going to move to Iran as missionaries, and then there was a revolution, and so they didn't move to Iran, but otherwise I could have grown up in Iran. And that was just the only thing that came to my head. So I kind of blurted this all out, and she just looked at me with a like withering gaze and went, "That's not a story. We're going to come back to you at the end." And so then everybody in the circle starts telling stories. And there's this woman who's rowed across the Pacific single-handed and been chased by a shark. I mean, I'm not making this up. She was literally there in the circle. This woman who's rowed across the Pacific. There's some guy who's started an art charity for people without limbs. There's this other incredible woman who lives on the Côte d'Azur and has a mad donkey, and there's like these people coming with these amazing stories, and the circle's getting closer back to me, and like Babette's Buster's sitting there with a withering gaze. I'm thinking, oh my God, what's it going to be? And so it gets back to me. And the thing that pops into my head was just a recent happening. And I've been in the car with my son, and there's just the two of us in the car, and we're driving along, and it's like dead quiet. And usually you always have music in the car, but it's dead quiet. And he's just looking at his hands, and he's looking out the window, and I'm just looking at the road and glancing across to him, because we're driving to school, or to a local school, because he's got to sit an entrance exam. And he's 12, must be 12, I guess, at the time. And there's just like this atmosphere in the car as we drive along. And literally for the last, I don't know, 5 months, every night I've been helping him prepare for this exam. So it's because it says, I'm really nervous. He must be just like completely nervous, but it's just silence. And so we get to the roundabout, the final roundabout before town, before school, before the exam. And I kind of pause to a halt. And he just looks over at me and he says, "Thanks, Dad, for helping me." And it's like, that was it. 5 words. That was the only words we spoke on that entire journey. But like, they were the 5 most powerful words I think a parent ever wants to hear. And she just said, "Nice. Okay, everybody, let's take a break." This was the Matthew Dix realization I should have had. This was about 8 years ago, 9 years ago. I should have had it 9 years ago, but then I had to rush out of the workshop and leave for some reason. I never had that realization. And Matthew Dix brought it to life, because it was just that realization that I didn't have to have the rowing across the Pacific tale. I just had to have and see and recognize the moment from my own life when that feeling changed from one thing to another, when that moment changed. And so since kind of reading Storytell, I've been evangelizing about this book to everybody, particularly at work, because I just think within any kind of company culture, story is so powerful. And again, the ability to be remembered for what you say is so powerful. And yet we're told not to bring the personal stories into that, when it's actually exactly what we should be bringing into it. And again, Matthew Dix has this thing about most corporate communications, company communications, he says, is, white, round, and flavorless. And it's a great description. Everything is bland because we're told to take the personality, the individuality, and the story out of it. And actually, just by putting that story in, just trying to put it back in, you will no longer be white, bland, and flavorless. You will stand out. People will remember you. And story is the thing that can do that.
But I'm wondering whether, in terms of your kind of now more kind of independent sales, connecting, audience building, have you found yourself reaching for personal stories as you meet with potential clients,
Good question.
working with teams?
So I don't think I'm a natural at this, would be my honest perspective myself, as my 20-odd year career of telling other people's stories would tell. I'm much more comfortable telling somebody else's story than telling my own. So I think I'm definitely still a beginner. If anything, I find it easier to do a little bit like in that context I was talking about earlier, oh, you've got to get up and tell a story. I can probably one come to mind, but if I'm in a day-to-day context, I find it much more challenging. And I don't know why that is. And I probably just need to practice a bit more, to be perfectly honest. What I definitely do find is that even with my intermittent kind of homework for life practice, which I think is on my phone as small stories, I call it. That though is definitely hugely valuable. And I think sometimes when I try and remember, I definitely try and take those more into like things like posting on LinkedIn or whatever. Because again, it's very easy to be very kind of jazz hands, isn't it, on LinkedIn? And actually to almost take that down and intentionally seek to be small and intimate and personal is, I think, really interesting and just quite rewarding at the same time. It's about, again, trying to get that sense of humanity across in a little way rather than the big all singing all dancing success of all time that we all are on LinkedIn.
I just have been thinking a lot while everyone's been talking about how stories are such a big part of belonging. And just to your point, James, about companies or organizations and how we help people feel a part of a culture. We all have all grown up in families and we tell the same stories over and over again. And we say, oh, are we still going to be telling these stories when we're 80? And sure, we probably will. And they're very powerful in that convening and sort of sense of helping people really feel part of something bigger than themselves, or just part of the narrative that weaves its way through an organization, a family, or whatever it is.
I want to say this is a Adam Grant study that they did around onboarding, or your first day at work being the most powerful day there is, and that getting people to tell stories about when have you been amazing at work, and just getting them to tell a story to the group about like that is incredibly powerful in terms of then their feeling of connection and saying, look, and this is how we want you to be when you work here, is just like that, better than that, maybe even. But that, again, just that if you put a story into that moment, that has so much power that ripples through how that person may then go on to feel and be in their role.